Nobody at Copper Creek Grill suspected that the quiet woman chopping vegetables in the corner had once placed a perfect shot through a 2-inch target from 8 football fields away. They saw Victoria Hayes as just another kitchen hand until the day Millbrook needed a miracle, and she became the only person standing between tragedy and salvation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through the grimy windows of Copper Creek Grill's kitchen, casting long shadows across the stainless steel prep stations. Victoria Hayes stood at her usual spot near the walk-in cooler, methodically dicing onions with movements so precise they could have been choreographed. Each cut was exactly 3/8 of an inch, each piece falling into perfect uniformity, a level of consistency that would have impressed a surgeon. But here it went completely unnoticed. At 34, Victoria had perfected the art of invisibility. She arrived at 5:30 each morning, an hour before anyone else, using the quiet time to prep vegetables and organize her station with military precision. Her knife roll contained blades that were sharpened to razor perfection, arranged in order of size and frequency of use. Her cutting board was positioned at exactly the right angle, her towels folded and placed within easy reach. Everything had its place. Everything served a purpose. Habits ingrained from years when such attention to detail meant the difference between life and death. Hayes. Chef Dominic Russo's voice cut across the kitchen like a whip crack. You done with those onions yet? We've got a full house tonight, and I need my prep cooks actually prepping, not daydreaming. Victoria's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but her hands never paused in their rhythmic motion. Almost finished, chef, she replied quietly, her voice carrying none of the emotion that flickered behind her dark eyes. Russo strutted over, his chef's coat immaculate despite having done no actual cooking yet. At 42, he wore his position like armor, using volume and intimidation to mask his mediocre skills. He'd built his reputation on taking credit for others' work and shifting blame when things went wrong. Victoria had watched him operate for 8 months now, cataloging his weaknesses with the same analytical precision she'd once used to assess enemy positions. Almost finished? Russo scoffed, picking up one of Victoria's perfectly diced onions and examining it with theatrical disdain. You know what your problem is, Hayes? No urgency, no passion. You cook like you're filling out paperwork. If only he knew, Victoria thought, maintaining her neutral expression. She'd filled out enough paperwork in her previous life after action reports, casualty assessments, mission debriefs. But those documents had weight, consequence. Here, Russo's criticism felt as substantial as morning mist. Ben Cooper, the 23-year-old sous chef, glanced over from his station where he was breaking down chickens. He'd been watching Victoria work for months, fascinated by her techniques. The way she held her knife, the economy of her movements, the way she seemed to see everything happening in the kitchen without ever looking up from her cutting board. There was something different about her, something that didn't fit the typical profile of a kitchen grunt working for $12 an hour. Leave her alone, chef, Ben said, trying to keep his tone light. Victoria's cuts are always perfect. Better than anyone else's in this kitchen. Russo's face flushed red. Did I ask for your opinion, Cooper? And it's Chef Russo to you. Just because you went to some fancy culinary school doesn't mean you know anything about running a real kitchen. Emma Walsh, one of the servers, pushed through the swing doors carrying a tray of dirty plates. She'd been working at Copper Creek for 2 years and had seen plenty of kitchen drama, but something about the way Russo treated Victoria always made her uncomfortable. The quiet chef never fought back, never complained, just absorbed the abuse, with a stoicism that seemed almost military in its discipline. Morning, Victoria, Emma said warmly, setting down her tray. How's it going? Victoria looked up briefly, offering a small smile, that transformed her usually serious face. "Good morning. Emma, coffee's fresh if you want some." It was a small kindness, but Emma noticed these things. Victoria always made sure the coffee was ready for the morning shift, always kept the communal areas clean, always stepped in to help when someone was overwhelmed. She was the kind of person who made everyone else's job easier while never asking for recognition. "Thanks," Emma said, pouring herself a cup. "You're a lifesaver." Russo rolled his eyes. "Save the social hour for your break time. Hayes, when you're done playing with those onions, start on the carrots. And make them consistent this time, not like those pathetic attempts yesterday." Victoria's knuckles whitened slightly around her knife handle. Yesterday's carrots had been cut to precise specifications, each piece exactly 1/4 inch in diameter, uniform enough to pass military inspection. But she said nothing, simply nodded and continued working, then watched the exchange with growing irritation. He'd noticed the pattern. Russo's constant criticism of Victoria's work, despite the fact that her prep was always flawless. The head chef seemed to take particular pleasure in humiliating the quiet woman, as if her competence somehow threatened his authority. "Chef Russo," Ben ventured carefully, "maybe we could rotate the prep assignments? Give Victoria a chance to work on something more challenging?" "More challenging?" Russo laughed harshly. "Hayes can barely handle basic knife work. You want me to trust her with anything more complex? She's lucky I keep her around at all. Half the prep cooks in this city would kill for a job here." Victoria's hands continued their steady rhythm, but those who knew how to look would have noticed the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her breathing became more controlled. She was using techniques learned in sniper school: breath control, emotional regulation, the ability to remain perfectly still even when every instinct screamed to move. Back then, it had been about making the shot when it counted. Now it was about surviving another day in a kitchen where her skills were invisible and her service unrecognized. The morning prep continued with its familiar dynamics. Russo bouncing between stations, finding fault with everyone's work while contributing nothing of his own. Ben trying to mediate and maintain some semblance of professional standards. Emma checking in periodically with words of encouragement for the kitchen staff. And Victoria, steady as a heartbeat, working through her tasks with a precision that bordered on the supernatural. What none of them knew was that the woman they saw as just another kitchen hand had once been Staff Sergeant Victoria Hayes, one of the most decorated snipers in the 1st Special Forces Group. She'd completed 3 tours overseas, with confirmed hits at distances that would make seasoned marksmen shake their heads in disbelief. Her record shot had been 847 yards in Afghanistan, a single bullet that had ended a hostage situation and saved the lives of an entire village. But those days were over. That Victoria Hayes existed only in classified files and the nightmares that still woke her at 3 in the morning. This Victoria Hayes chopped vegetables, took orders from mediocre chefs, and tried to find purpose in the simple act of feeding people instead of the complex calculus of eliminating threats. As the morning wore on, manager Kevin Brooks made his appearance, clipboard in hand and cost-cutting measures on his mind. At 51, Brooks was the kind of manager who saw everything in terms of profit margins and labor costs. He'd been pressuring Russo to reduce staff, to find ways to squeeze more productivity out of fewer people. "Russo," Brooks called out, surveying the kitchen with calculating eyes, "we need to talk about staffing levels. Corporate's breathing down my neck about labor costs." Victoria kept working, but her enhanced hearing sharpened by years of listening. For the subtle sounds that meant danger was approaching, picked up every word of their hushed conversation near the office door. "I've been looking at the numbers," Brooks continued. "Some of these prep positions could be eliminated. Cross-train the line cooks to handle their own mise en place. What about Hayes?" Russo asked, glancing toward Victoria's station. "She's been here 8 months, but honestly, She's just taking up space. No initiative, no personality, just another warm body. Brooks nodded thoughtfully. Keep an eye on her performance. First sign of problems, we make a change. Can't afford dead. Wait in this economy. Victoria's knife never paused, but something cold settled in her chest. She'd heard similar conversations before, different context, same dismissive tone. The assumption that quiet meant incompetent, that following orders meant lacking intelligence, that not seeking attention meant having nothing valuable to offer. As the morning prep session concluded, and the kitchen began gearing up for lunch service, Victoria cleaned her station with the same methodical care she brought to everything else. Her knives were cleaned, dried, and returned to their role in perfect order. Her cutting boards were sanitized and stored. The stainless steel surfaces gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. She was invisible to them, just another piece of kitchen equipment that performed its function without requiring attention or appreciation. But Victoria had learned long ago that being underestimated could be an advantage. People revealed their true nature when they thought no one important was watching. They made mistakes when they assumed no one competent was paying attention. What she didn't know was that in less than 48 hours, all of their assumptions about the quiet chef would be shattered. The skills they dismissed as routine prep work would prove to be the foundation of something extraordinary. And the woman they saw as just another kitchen hand would demonstrate that some talents, once mastered, never truly fade. They simply wait for the moment when they're needed most. For now, Victoria Hayes continued chopping vegetables with surgical precision, her movements economical and exact, while around her the chaos of a busy kitchen swirled on, oblivious to the fact that they were working alongside someone who had once held life and death in her steady hands from distances they could barely imagine. The lunch rush at Copper Creek Grill was in full swing when Ben Cooper first noticed something unusual about Victoria's knife work. He'd been watching her from his station, ostensibly focused on plating salads, but finding himself drawn to the rhythmic precision of her movements. It wasn't just that her cuts were uniform, though they were, to an almost obsessive degree. It was the way she held the blade, the angle of her wrist, the controlled breathing that preceded each series of cuts. "Victoria," Ben called out during a brief lull between orders. "Where did you learn to handle a knife like that?" She glanced up, her dark eyes meeting his for just a moment before returning to her work. "Practice," she said simply, but Ben noticed the slight hesitation, as if she'd started to say something else and caught herself. Chef Russo, overhearing the exchange, snorted derisively. "It's called basic knife skills, Cooper. Maybe if you spent less time chatting and more time working, you'd develop some yourself." But Ben had attended the Culinary Institute, had trained under chefs who'd worked in Michelin-starred restaurants. He recognized technique when he saw it, and Victoria's movements weren't just competent, they were masterful. The way she positioned her guide hand, the consistent rocking motion, the effortless transition between different cutting techniques. This wasn't something you learned from YouTube videos or community college cooking classes. As the afternoon wore on, Ben found more opportunities to observe Victoria. When she thought no one was watching, her true abilities seemed to surface. She could identify the doneness of proteins by sound alone, adjusting oven temperatures with the precision of someone who understood heat transfer on an almost scientific level. Her mise en place was organized with military efficiency, everything labeled, dated, and positioned for maximum workflow. Most telling was her situational awareness. Victoria always seemed to know what was happening throughout the kitchen without appearing to look. She'd step aside moments before someone needed to pass behind her, anticipate when equipment was about to fail, sense when temperatures were off before the thermometers confirmed it. It was like she had radar, some sixth sense that kept her one step ahead of the chaos. Emma Walsh noticed it too. During the afternoon break, she found Victoria in the prep area, cleaning down surfaces with methodical thoroughness. "You know," Emma said, settling onto a milk crate that served as makeshift seating, "I've been working restaurants for 5 years, and I've never seen anyone work like you do." Victoria's hands stilled for just a moment. "What do you mean? The way you see everything?" "Last week when that new server was about to drop that tray of glasses, you caught her elbow before she even started to stumble. And yesterday, you knew the walk-in cooler was going to fail before the temperature alarm went off. Just paying attention," Victoria said, but Emma caught the tension in her voice. "My brother was in the army," Emma continued casually. "Marines, actually. He has that same ... awareness, like he's always scanning for threats, even when he's just sitting in a coffee shop." Victoria's cleaning cloth moved in steady circles, but Emma noticed her knuckles had gone white. "I wouldn't know about that," she said quietly. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Kevin Brooks, his perpetual clipboard in hand, and a new consultant in tow, a thin man in expensive suit, who looked like he'd never set foot in a working kitchen before. "This is our prep area," Brooks was saying, gesturing around the space where Victoria worked. "As you can see, we've got significant opportunities for efficiency improvements." The consultant, whose name tag read Marcus Steinberg Operational Excellence, made notes on his tablet. "How many prep staff do you currently employ?" "4 full-time, 2 part-time," Brooks replied. "But honestly, we could probably get by with half that number. Most of this work is pretty basic: chopping vegetables, portioning proteins. Not exactly rocket science." Victoria continued cleaning, but her movements became more controlled, more deliberate. Ben recognized the signs, the same way she looked when Russo was berating her, that internal stillness that seemed to mask something much more volatile. "What about skills assessment?" Steinberg asked. "Have you evaluated which staff members are actually contributing value versus just taking up payroll space?" Brooks glanced toward Victoria. "Some of them are pretty interchangeable. Take Hayes over there. Been here 8 months. Does her job, no complaints, but no real initiative either. Classic example of someone who could probably be replaced with a part-timer making half the wage." The cleaning cloth in Victoria's hand had stopped moving entirely. Ben watched her face, saw the micro-expressions that most people would miss, the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her jaw set just a fraction more firmly. He'd seen that look before, on the faces of soldiers in documentaries, the moment when they decided they'd had enough. "Let me show you our kitchen efficiency metrics," Brooks continued, leading Steinberg toward the office. As they walked away, their voices carried back through the kitchen. "The key is identifying dead weight early," Steinberg was saying. "Employees who do the minimum but don't contribute to growth or innovation. They're profit drains, and in today's market, you can't afford to carry them." Victoria stood slowly, her cleaning supplies arranged with perfect precision. For a moment, Ben thought she might say something, might finally push back against the casual dismissal of her worth. Instead, she picked up her knife roll and walked to her station, beginning her afternoon prep with movements that seemed even more controlled than usual. But Ben noticed something else, the way Victoria tested the weight of each knife as she removed it from the roll, the practiced flip she gave her 8-inch chef's knife before beginning to work. It was subtle, almost unconscious, but it reminded him of something he'd seen in action movies, the way soldiers checked their weapons before heading into combat. "Victoria," he said quietly, moving to the station next to hers, "you okay?" She nodded without looking up. "Fine. Those guys don't know what they're talking about. Anyone with eyes can see you're the most skilled prep cook in this kitchen." "Skill doesn't matter if people don't want to see it," Victoria replied, her voice carrying a weariness that seemed to come from somewhere much deeper than restaurant. Politics. As the afternoon progressed, more small details began to add up in Ben's mind. The way Victoria's knife cuts were so precise, they could have been measured with calipers. The fact that she never seemed to get cut, never had to stop and bandage a finger like everyone else did occasionally. Her ability to work in low light during the brief power outage last month. She'd continued prepping vegetables by the emergency lighting while everyone else had stopped to wait for the electricity to return. Most intriguingly, there were the modifications she'd made to her station. Small things that individually seemed insignificant, but together painted a picture of someone who understood efficiency and ergonomics on a level that went far beyond restaurant work. Her knife magnets were positioned at specific angles for quick access. Her cutting boards were secured with small rubber grips that prevented sliding. Even her towels were folded and positioned in a way that allowed for rapid access without taking her eyes off her work. Emma approached Ben during the dinner prep. "You notice it too, don't you?" she said quietly. "Notice what?" "That there's more to Victoria than meets the eye. The way she moves, the way she thinks. It's like she's operating on a completely different level than the rest of us." Ben nodded. Slowly, "I've been thinking the same thing. Her knife work is too good for someone who just learned on the job. And her spatial awareness, double quotes." He shook his head. "It's like she has eyes in the back of her head. So what do you think? Culinary school she's not telling us about." Ben considered this, watching Victoria as she worked through her prep list with machine-like efficiency. "I don't think it's culinary school," he said finally. "I think it's something else entirely." As the dinner rush began to build, the kitchen fell into its familiar rhythm of controlled chaos. Orders came in, plates went out, temperatures rose, and tempers occasionally flared. Through it all, Victoria maintained her steady presence, the eye of calm in the storm, handling her responsibilities with a competence that went unrecognized by management but was quietly appreciated by everyone who actually worked beside her. What none of them realized was that the skills they were witnessing, the precision, the awareness, the unshakable composure under pressure, had been forged in places where mistakes weren't just embarrassing, they were fatal. Victoria Hayes was operating at about 10% of her actual capabilities, the way a Formula One driver might handle morning traffic. The question wasn't whether she could do more. It was whether she'd ever be given the chance to show what she was truly capable of. But change was coming to Copper Creek Grill, and with it, circumstances that would demand every ounce of Victoria's hidden expertise. The quiet chef who'd been dismissed as interchangeable was about to prove that some skills, once mastered, never fade. They simply wait for the right moment to save the day. The nightmare always started the same way. Victoria was back in the mountains of Afghanistan, the rocky terrain of Kandahar province stretching endlessly beneath a sky so blue it hurt to look at. She was in position on the ridgeline, her M24 sniper rifle steady against her shoulder, the familiar weight of the weapon as comforting as an old friend. Through her scope, she could see the village below, mud brick houses, clustered around a central square where children had been playing just hours before. Now those same children were hostages. "Overwatch, this is command," the voice crackled in her earpiece. "We have confirmation of 12 civilians in the compound, including 6 minors. Unknown number of hostiles. You are weapons-free on confirmed targets only." Staff Sergeant Victoria Hayes adjusted her breathing, feeling her heart rate slow to the steady rhythm she'd trained for thousands of hours to achieve. At 26, she was already one of the most decorated snipers in the 1st Special Forces group, with skills that had earned her the respect of men who'd been shooting since before she was born. But this impossible shot across a valley that measured 847 yards according to her rangefinder, would define her career. "I have eyes on 3 tangos, she reported, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. 2 armed males, AK-47s, positioning near the north wall. 1 female, appears to be wearing an explosive vest, holding what looks like a detonator. The woman in the vest was standing directly behind a group of huddled children, using them as human shields, while she shouted demands in Pashto. Intelligence had identified her as Zahra Nassiri, a Taliban commander known for her ruthlessness and her willingness to sacrifice civilians to achieve her objectives. Negative on the female target, command responded. Too much risk of civilian casualties. Wait for a cleaner shot. But Victoria could see what command couldn't. The way the woman's finger was twitching on the detonator. The wild look in her eyes that spoke of someone who'd already decided to die and take as many innocents with her as possible. The math was simple and terrible. Wait for a cleaner shot that might never come, or take an impossible shot through a gap barely 2 inches wide. With children's lives hanging in the balance, the wind was gusting at 15 miles per hour, quartering from the northeast. Temperature was 98 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity near zero. She had to account for bullet drop over nearly half a mile, wind drift, the curvature of the earth itself. Any one of a dozen variables could send her bullet inches off target, and inches meant the difference between saving lives and ending them. Command, I have a possible shot, Victoria said quietly. 2-inch gap between targets, approximately 847 yards. Wind conditions are borderline, but I think I can make it. There was a pause that seemed to stretch forever. Overwatch, that's a negative. Hold your fire until we have a better angle. Victoria closed her eyes for just a moment, centering herself. In sniper school at Fort Benning, her instructors had taught her that sometimes the hardest part of the job wasn't making the shot, it was knowing when to take it. She thought of her team leader, Sergeant First Class Miguel Rodriguez, who'd told her on her first deployment, "Hayes, your job isn't to follow orders blindly. Your job is to save lives." Sometimes those two things are the same. Sometimes they're not. Command, I'm taking the shot, she said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that brooked no argument. Overwatch, you are ordered to hold fire. Acknowledge. Victoria switched off her radio. Through her scope, she watched the woman raise the detonator higher, her mouth moving in what looked like a prayer or a final statement. The children cowered beneath her, 3 boys and 3 girls, the oldest maybe 10 years old. Victoria thought of her own sister back home in Oregon, of the niece she'd never met because she'd been deployed during her birth. She steadied her breathing, let her heart rate drop to its combat rhythm. The crosshairs settled on the tiny gap between the terrorist's head and the nearest child. 2 inches of space across 847 yards. In practical terms, it was like threading a needle from the length of 8 football fields while riding a horse in an earthquake. Victoria Hayes took the shot. The .308 caliber bullet traveled for nearly 3 seconds, covering the distance at over 2,500 feet per second. It passed through the gap with less than half an inch to spare on either side, striking Zahra Nassiri in the center of her forehead with enough force to drop her instantly. The detonator fell from nerveless fingers, clattering harmlessly onto the packed dirt. The children were safe. Victoria woke up at 3:17 a.m., as she did every night, her heart racing and her sheets soaked with sweat. For a moment, she was still on that ridgeline, still feeling the weight of the rifle, still seeing the moment when the terrorist's head snapped back and the children looked up in confusion, not understanding that they'd just been saved by a shot. That would be talked about in sniper circles for decades to come, but she wasn't in Afghanistan anymore. She was in her small apartment above the Millbrook laundromat, surrounded by the detritus of a civilian life that still felt like a costume she was wearing. The digital clock cast red numbers across her ceiling. 3:17 a.m. Always 3:17 a.m. The same time she'd taken the shot that made her famous and destroyed her career. Because command hadn't seen it as heroism. They'd seen it as insubordination. Disobeying direct orders, no matter how many lives it saved, was still disobeying direct orders. The official record showed that Staff Sergeant Hayes had acted outside the chain of command and endangered the mission. The unofficial record, the one whispered about in special Forces bars around the world said that Victoria Hayes had made the shot of the century and saved 6 children with a bullet that defied physics, the commendation, and the court-martial. Had arrived on the same day. Victoria sat up in bed, running her hands through her hair. The apartment was spartanly furnished: a bed, a small table, 2 chairs, and a bookshelf lined with cookbooks. On the wall hung her only decoration, a framed photo of her old team. Rodriguez in the center, grinning despite the heat and dust of Kandahar. Jackson and Martinez flanking him, weapons slung casually across their chests. And Victoria on the right, her face serious beneath her boonie hat, the M24 cradled in her arms like a sleeping child. They were all dead now. Not from that mission. That one had ended with the children safe and the terrorists neutralized. No, her team had died 6 months later in a convoy ambush outside Kabul that Victoria had missed because she'd been in front of a disciplinary board, explaining for the 100th time why she'd disobeyed orders to save civilian lives. The survivor's guilt was worse than the nightmares. At least in the dreams, she was still a soldier, still serving a purpose. In her waking hours, she was just Victoria Hayes, prep cook at Copper Creek Grill, chopping vegetables with the same precision she'd once used to save lives from impossible distances. She'd tried other jobs after her medical discharge. The leg injury from her final mission had healed, but the psychological evaluation had deemed her unsuitable for continued service due to issues with authority and independent decision-making. In civilian terms, that meant she thought for herself and wasn't afraid to act when lives were on the line. Security work had been a disaster. Too many triggers, too many situations that reminded her of what she'd lost. Construction had been mind-numbing. Teaching had required credentials she didn't have. But cooking was creation instead of destruction. It was nourishing instead of eliminating. It was a way to serve people that didn't require weapons or split-second decisions that haunted you for the rest of your life. The irony wasn't lost on her, that she'd traded a rifle for a knife, that her hands now created meals instead of ending threats. Both required precision. Both demanded respect for the tools of the trade. Both served to protect and nourish others. The skills translated more than most people would ever realize. Victoria looked at the clock again. 3:24 a.m. In 2 hours, she'd be at the restaurant, beginning another day of invisibility. Chef Russo would bark orders, Manager Brooks would calculate costs, and she would chop vegetables with the same methodical precision that had once made her one of the most feared snipers in the Special Forces. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between prep and service, she could feel the weight of the M24 in her hands again. She could remember what it felt like to be more than just another kitchen worker, to be someone whose skills mattered, whose judgment was trusted, whose actions could change the outcome of life and death situations. Those days were supposed to be over. Victoria Hayes, prep cook, lived a quiet life of measured anonymity. Staff Sergeant Hayes, sniper, existed only in classified files and the memories of those who'd served beside her. What she didn't know was that in less than 24 hours, those two identities would collide in a way that would test every skill she'd ever learned and force her to choose between the safety of invisibility and the demands of a situation that would require nothing less than perfect precision at an impossible distance. The shot that would save lives was coming. Victoria Hayes just didn't know it yet. The next morning brought more bad news wrapped in corporate speak. Victoria arrived at her usual 5:30 a.m. to find manager Kevin Brooks already in the kitchen, his laptop open on the prep table she normally used, spreadsheets glowing on the screen like digital harbingers of doom. "Hayes," Brooks called out without looking up. "Good, you're here early. We need to talk." Victoria set down her knife roll with deliberate care, recognizing the tone that meant someone was about to get bad news delivered in the most impersonal way possible. She'd heard similar conversations in the Army budget cuts disguised as operational restructuring, layoffs presented as strategic realignment. Marcus Steinberg finished his efficiency analysis, Brooks continued, finally looking up from his screen. His recommendations are comprehensive. Through the kitchen swing doors, Victoria could hear the morning prep crew beginning to arrive. Ben's voice carried as he discussed the day's specials with one of the line cooks, his enthusiasm for the work a sharp contrast to the corporate calculation happening at her station. "The bottom line is this," Brooks said, turning his laptop so Victoria could see the colorful charts and graphs. "We're carrying excess labor costs in the prep department. Steinberg believes we can eliminate 2 full-time positions and cross-train existing staff to handle the workload." Victoria studied the spreadsheet, her trained eye quickly parsing the data. The analysis was superficial at best, raw numbers that failed to account for skill levels, efficiency variations, or the reality of kitchen operations during peak periods. It was the kind of assessment that looked good in a boardroom but would fall apart the moment it hit the real world. "Which positions?" she asked quietly. Brooks cleared his throat uncomfortably. "That hasn't been finalized yet. But I want you to understand that everyone's performance is being evaluated. Productivity, versatility, cost-effectiveness. The staff who can demonstrate real value will be retained. The others... He shrugged. The unspoken message was clear. Victoria had been marked as expendable, her months of consistent performance dismissed as easily replaceable. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so familiar once again. Her competence was being mistaken for mediocrity by people who couldn't recognize expertise when it was standing right in front of them. Chef Russo arrived 30 minutes later, his mood even fouler than usual. Victoria had learned to read the signs, the way he slammed his knife case down, the aggressive energy in his movements, the volume of his voice as he barked unnecessary orders at staff who weren't even late. "Hayes!" he called out before he'd even changed into his chef's coat. "That prep list you finished yesterday? Half of it was wrong. The carrots were cut too small, the onions weren't uniform, and don't get me started on those pathetic excuses for Brunoy's vegetables." Victoria's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The vegetables in question had been cut to precise specifications, each piece measured to exactly the dimensions called for in the restaurant's standardized recipes. She double-checked her work, as she always did, before storing everything in labeled containers with preparation times and dates clearly marked. "I can recut anything that doesn't meet standards," she said evenly. "Recut?" Russo's voice rose to a level that made conversations throughout the kitchen pause. "Do you have any idea how much waste that represents? How much it costs this restaurant when prep work has to be done twice?" Ben Cooper looked up from his station, frowning. He'd used Victoria's prep work the day before and found it flawless, better than anything he could have produced himself. The vegetables had been cut with surgical precision, portioned exactly, and prepared with a level of care that was honestly above what the restaurant's price point demanded. "Chef Russo," Ben interjected carefully, "I used Victoria's prep yesterday for the lunch specials. Everything was perfectly. Did I ask for your opinion, Cooper?" Russo whirled on him, his face flushed with the kind of anger that came from being challenged in front of subordinates. "You want to defend substandard work? Maybe you're not ready for the responsibilities I've been giving you." The kitchen fell silent, except for the hum of refrigeration units and the distant sound of morning traffic. Victoria watched the interaction with the detached analysis she'd once brought to battlefield assessments. Russo was feeling threatened by the efficiency consultant, by management pressure, by his own inadequacies as a leader. He was lashing out at safe targets, people who couldn't fight back without risking their jobs. Emma Walsh pushed through the swing doors carrying coffee for the kitchen staff, a small kindness she performed every morning. She immediately sensed the tension. her eyes moving between Russo's angry face and Victoria's carefully neutral expression. "Morning, everyone," she said brightly, trying to diffuse the situation with forced cheerfulness. "Fresh coffee and I brought those pastries from the bakery down the street." "This isn't a social hour," Russo snapped. "And Hayes, since you seem to have so much free time to chat with the servers, maybe you can explain why your knife skills are still at the level of a first-year culinary student." Victoria's hands, which had been moving steadily through her morning prep, went perfectly still. In the sudden quiet, everyone in the kitchen could hear the subtle change in her breathing deeper, more controlled, the kind of breathing that preceded action. "My knife skills," Victoria said quietly, her voice carrying a new edge that made several people look up from their work, "are adequate for the position." "Adequate?" Russo laughed harshly. "Hayes, I've seen high school kids in vocational programs who could run circles around your technique. You hold your knife like you're afraid of it. You cut like you're working on a time clock instead of trying to achieve consistency. And your mise en place looks like it was organized by someone who's never worked in a professional kitchen." The criticism was so wildly inaccurate that Ben actually opened his mouth to protest, but something in Victoria's posture stopped him. She'd gone completely still, not the relaxed stillness of someone at rest, but the coiled stillness of a predator, deciding whether to strike. "Perhaps," Victoria said, her voice steady as a heartbeat, "you'd like to demonstrate the proper technique." It was a challenge delivered so quietly that some people might have missed it. But Russo heard the undertone, the subtle shift from deference to something that sounded almost like invitation. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across his face. "I don't need to prove anything to a prep cook," he said. But his voice had lost some of its volume. "Of course not." Victoria picked up her knife, testing its weight with a movement so fluid it looked like a magic trick. "But if my technique is as poor as you suggest, perhaps a demonstration would help me improve." The kitchen was absolutely silent now. Even the dishwashers had stopped their work to watch the confrontation unfold. Emma found herself holding her breath, sensing that something significant was about to happen, though she couldn't quite identify what. Brooks, who had been watching from near the office door, stepped forward. "This is exactly the kind of workplace drama we need to eliminate," he said authoritatively. "Hayes, get back to your prep work. Russo, we have a restaurant to run." But the moment had crystallized something that had been building for months. Victoria looked around the kitchen at faces she'd worked beside, people who'd accepted her quiet competence without ever questioning what lay beneath it. She thought of her old team, of the respect that came from demonstrating skill rather than demanding it, of the difference between authority that was earned and authority that was simply assumed. "You know what, Mr. Brooks?" Victoria said, setting down her knife with deliberate precision. "Maybe Marcus Steinberg was right. Maybe this kitchen does need some efficiency improvements." She began untying her apron, her movements calm and deliberate. "But the dead weight you're looking to cut? It's not in the prep department." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired weapon. Victoria had just done something that 3 years of military discipline and 8 months of civilian employment had taught her not to do. She'd stopped accepting disrespect from people who'd never earned the right to give it. Brooks' face went white, then red. "Hayes, if you walk out that door, don't bother coming back." Victoria paused, her hand on her knife roll. For a moment, she seemed to be weighing something that went far beyond the immediate situation. Then she straightened, and everyone in the kitchen saw a transformation that was subtle but unmistakable. The quiet prep cook was gone, replaced by someone who carried herself with the confidence of a person who'd faced real challenges and emerged victorious. "Mr. Brooks," she said quietly, "I've been dismissed by better people than you for much better reasons. But I've never been dismissed by anyone who didn't eventually regret it." She walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at Ben and Emma. "Thank you for treating me like a human being. That meant more than you know. As the door swung shut behind her, the kitchen remained frozen in stunned silence. Nobody quite understood what they'd just witnessed, but everyone sensed that they'd seen the real Victoria Hayes for the first time, and that she was nothing like the quiet woman they'd thought they knew. What none of them realized was that in less than 6 hours, they'd all be wishing desperately that she would come back. The first 911 call came in at 2:47 p.m. on what had started as an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in Millbrook. Margaret Chun, a kindergarten teacher at Millbrook Elementary, was walking her class back from the playground when she saw the man in tactical gear climbing the fence of the water treatment facility that sat on the hill overlooking the town. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone with a gun at the water plant, Margaret whispered into her phone, hustling her students toward the school building. He's wearing some kind of military outfit, and he just cut through the fence. Within minutes, the Millbrook Police Department's 3 patrol cars were racing up the winding road toward the facility. What they found when they arrived sent a chill through every officer on the scene. The main gate stood open. The security guard's booth was empty with signs of a struggle, and positioned on the facility's highest tower was a figure in military fatigues with what appeared to be a high-powered rifle. Detective Rachel Stone was the first to establish a perimeter, her years of training kicking in as she assessed the tactical nightmare unfolding before them. The water treatment facility sat on Eagle Point Ridge, a strategic position that offered commanding views of the entire town below. From that elevation, a skilled marksman could potentially hit targets anywhere in Millbrook's downtown core. Command. This is Detective Stone, she radioed back to headquarters. We have an armed suspect in a fortified position approximately 800 yards above the town center. I'm requesting immediate backup and contacting the State Police Tactical Unit. The radio crackled with the strained voice of Police Chief William Torres. Stone, what's the threat assessment? Do we have civilian casualties? Rachel trained her binoculars on the tower, trying to get a clear view of the suspect. Unknown at this time. The subject appears to be setting up some kind of shooting position. We need to evacuate the downtown area immediately. As if summoned by her words, the first shot rang out across the valley. 800 yards below. The bullet struck the pavement directly in front of Millbrook's busiest intersection, sending chunks of concrete flying and causing immediate panic among the pedestrians and drivers who witnessed it. Car horns blared as vehicles swerved and collided in their desperation to escape the invisible threat from above. At Copper Creek Grill, the staff was in the middle of the afternoon setup when they heard the distant crack of the rifle shot. Ben. Cooper looked up from his prep work, frowning. Was that gunfire? He asked. Emma Walsh, who was setting up tables in the dining room, felt her blood run cold. Her brother had taught her to recognize the sound during his brief stint in law enforcement. That was definitely a rifle, she called back to the kitchen. Chef Russo, who had been in a foul mood since Victoria's departure that morning, waved dismissively. Probably just some idiot hunter, nothing to do with us. But his casual dismissal was interrupted by the wail of sirens as every emergency vehicle in Millbrook converged on the town center. Through the restaurant's front windows, they could see people running, abandoning their cars in the middle of the street as panic spread through the downtown area. Brooks emerged from his office, his face pale as he stared at his phone. The emergency alert system just sent out a message. There's an active shooter situation. Everyone's supposed to shelter in place. The second shot came 30 seconds later, this one striking the clock tower of the Millbrook courthouse with enough force to shatter the clock face and send debris raining down on the street below. The message was clear. The shooter could hit whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. Detective Stone watched in growing desperation as her officers took cover behind their patrol cars, effectively pinned down by a threat they couldn't reach. The water treatment facility was built like a fortress with concrete walls and limited access points. A direct assault would be suicide, and even if they could reach the building, the suspect had the high ground and clear sightlines for miles. In every direction. "Command, I need that tactical unit here now," she radioed. "And get me everything we have on the facility's layout. There has to be another way up there." Chief Torres' voice was tight with stress. "Tactical team is 40 minutes out, minimum. State Police Sniper Unit is over an hour away. Stone, I need options now." Rachel stared up at the tower through her binoculars, her mind racing through tactical scenarios. 800 yards was an extreme distance for most police marksmen. Hell, it was an extreme distance for most military snipers. Whoever was up there wasn't just dangerous, they were exceptionally skilled. The third shot proved her point. This bullet struck the window of Patterson's hardware store, exactly where old Mr. Patterson could be seen moving behind the counter. The glass exploded inward, but the shot was precisely placed to miss the elderly man by inches, a demonstration of accuracy that sent a clear message about the shooter's capabilities. "He's not trying to kill anyone yet," Rachel realized, her voice carrying over the radio. "He's showing us what he can do." At the elementary school, Margaret Chun was helping to evacuate her students when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Chun?" The voice was electronically distorted, clearly disguised. "You called 911 about me earlier." Margaret's hand trembling as she held the phone. "Who is this?" "I'm the man you saw at the water facility. I want you to know that I have no intention of hurting children. But I need you to deliver a message to the police." "What message?" "Tell them that I have enough ammunition and supplies to stay here for days. Tell them that I can hit any target in your town with precision accuracy. And tell them that if they try to assault this position, I will start aiming to kill instead of aiming to warn." The line went dead. Back at Copper Creek Grill, the staff had gathered around the small television in the break room, watching the local news coverage with growing horror. The reporter, broadcasting from what she described as a safe distance, was explaining the situation to viewers who were just beginning to understand the scope of the crisis. "The suspect is positioned at the Millbrook water treatment facility, approximately 800 yards above the town center," the reporter was saying. "Police sources confirm that the individual appears to be highly trained and is armed with what experts believe to be a precision rifle capable of accurate fire at extreme distances." Then Cooper felt a chill run down his spine. 800 yards, he said quietly. That's almost half a mile." Emma nodded, her face pale. "My brother told me once that most police snipers can't make reliable shots past 300 yards. This is way beyond normal capabilities." Chef Russo scoffed, though his bravado sounded forced. "So what? It's not our problem. Police will handle it." "But—" Brooks was staring at his phone, reading updates from the emergency management system. "They're saying the tactical team is still 30 minutes away, and even when they get here ... He shook his head. "How do you fight someone who can hit targets from that distance?" The fourth shot came at 3:15 p.m., striking the antenna array on top of the police station itself. The message was unmistakable. Nowhere in Millbrook was beyond the shooter's reach. "Detective." Stone received the message from the elementary school teacher and felt her tactical options narrowing to zero. The suspect wasn't just skilled, they were operating with a level of precision that suggested military training of the highest caliber. The kind of training that turned soldiers into legends, that created the kind of marksman who could change the outcome of entire battles with a single shot. "Command," she radioed, her voice heavy with the weight of an impossible situation. "We need to start thinking outside the box here. This isn't a typical police situation. We're dealing with someone who has capabilities that exceed our normal response protocols." Chief Torres' reply carried the frustration of a man facing his worst nightmare. "Stone, I'm open to suggestions. But right now, we're outgunned and outpositioned by someone who seems to be playing a game we don't know the rules to." As the afternoon stretched on and the crisis deepened, none of them had any idea that the solution to their impossible problem was sitting in a small apartment above the Millbrook laundromat, watching the news coverage with the trained eye of someone who understood exactly what they were facing. Victoria Hayes recognized the tactical situation immediately. She knew the facility's layout from her morning runs up Eagle Point Ridge. She understood the challenge of an 800-yard shot from elevation. Most importantly, she recognized the precision and restraint being demonstrated by the shooter, the hallmarks of professional military training. But Victoria Hayes was just an unemployed prep cook now, dismissed from her job for standing up to a bully. She had no authority, no official capacity, and no reason to get involved in a situation that would inevitably remind her of everything she'd tried to leave behind, at least. That's what she told herself as she watched the fourth shot strike the police station and realized that Millbrook was facing a crisis that its first responders were simply not equipped to handle. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The call came at 3:45 p.m., just as the crisis was entering its second hour. Emma Walsh's hands were shaking as she dialed Victoria's number, her voice barely steady when the former prep cook answered. "Victoria? It's Emma from the restaurant. Are you watching the news?" Victoria was indeed watching, her trained eye analyzing every detail the reporters managed to capture. "I'm aware of the situation," she said carefully. "Victoria, I know this is going to sound crazy, but my brother Marcus is a detective with the state police. He's been called in to assist, and he just told me something that ... Well, it's probably nothing, but..." Emma paused, gathering her courage. "The shooter is positioned exactly 800 yards from the town center. Marcus said that's an extreme distance, that most police snipers can't make reliable shots past 300 yards. But yesterday, when you were talking to Ben about knife techniques, you mentioned something about precision at distance, and the way you said it... Victoria felt her chest tighten. She'd been careful for months to avoid any mention of her past, but apparently small slips had been noticed by people who were paying attention. "Emma, I appreciate the call, but I'm not sure what you're suggesting. I'm suggesting that maybe you know more about this kind of situation than you let on. Look, I don't know your background, and I'm not asking you to tell me. But if there's anything at all that you could share with the authorities that might help." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, watching the news coverage of Detective Stone's increasingly desperate attempts to establish communication with the shooter. The tactical situation was deteriorating by the hour, and she could see that the local authorities were completely out of their depth. "Have them call me," she said finally. 20 minutes later, Detective Stone was standing in Victoria's small apartment, her skepticism evident as she looked around the modest space. This was the person Emma Walsh thought might have insights into their crisis? A fired restaurant worker living above a laundromat? "Ms. Hayes, I appreciate Emma's concern, but I'm not sure how a prep cook can help us with a tactical situation." Victoria gestured for Stone to sit at her small table. "What exactly has the shooter communicated so far?" Stone frowned. "He called the elementary school teacher who first spotted him. Said he has supplies for days, demonstrated his accuracy with warning shots, and threatened to start killing if we attempt an assault. What about demands, ransom requests, political statements? Nothing. That's what has us confused. Usually in these situations, there's some kind of agenda, some message the perpetrator wants to deliver. This guy seems content to just hold the position." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "What can you tell me about the facility itself? Layout, security measures, access points?" Stone's skepticism was growing. "Ma'am, I can't discuss operational details with civilians. If you have information that might help us, I'd be happy to hear it, but..." "Detective Stone," Victoria interrupted quietly, What's your assessment of the shooter's skill level? Well, based on the accuracy we've witnessed, we believe we're dealing with someone with advanced training, possibly military background, definitely familiar with precision shooting. The facility he's chosen, what's your tactical assessment of that position? Stone found herself answering almost without thinking. It's nearly perfect. High ground, clear sight lines, limited access routes, concrete construction that provides excellent cover. If I were planning a defensive position. She stopped, realizing that the questions Victoria was asking weren't the kind that civilians typically knew to ask. Victoria stood and walked to her bookshelf, returning with a worn manual on advanced marksmanship. Detective, what's the longest confirmed sniper kill in military history? I don't know. Why would that matter? Longest confirmed kill was made by a Canadian sniper in Iraq, 2017. Distance was 3,540 meters, over 2 miles. The shot took nearly 10 seconds to reach its target. Victoria's voice had taken on a different quality, more authoritative, more precise. Your shooter is working at 800 yards. That's well within the capabilities of anyone with advanced military training. Stone stared at the manual in Victoria's hands, noting the highlighting and margin notes that suggested extensive study. Ms. Hayes, what exactly is your background? Before Victoria could answer, Stone's radio crackled with urgent traffic. All units, all units. The suspect is fired again. This time he hit the water tower. We're seeing a significant leak. Looks like he punctured the main tank. Victoria's expression hardened. He's escalating. First the demonstration shots now. He's targeting infrastructure. Detective, you need to understand something. Whoever is up there isn't just holding a position randomly. He's controlling your response, limiting your options, and demonstrating capabilities that your standard tactical approach can't counter. How do you know all this? Victoria met Stone's eyes directly. Because I've been in similar situations, both as the person providing overwatch and as the person trying to neutralize a threat in a fortified position. Stone felt something click into place. You're military. Was military, Army Special Forces, sniper specialist. 12 years of service, 3 combat deployments. Victoria's voice was matter-of-fact, but Stone could hear the weight behind the words. Jesus Christ. Stone breathed. Emma was right. You do know about this stuff. I know enough to tell you that your current approach is going to get people killed. The shooter is demonstrating precision and restraint now, but that water tower shot was a message. He's showing you that he can disrupt critical infrastructure whenever he chooses. Stone leaned forward. What would you do? Victoria was quiet. For a moment, staring at the television screen where aerial footage showed the tactical team finally arriving and setting up their command post. Your tactical team is about to make the same mistake that gets people killed in these situations. They're going to treat this like a standard hostage scenario or building assault. And it's not? Detective, what you're facing is a trained sniper. In a prepared position with clear fields of fire and unlimited ammunition. Your tactical team's standard approach: establish perimeter, attempt negotiation, plan dynamic entry. That playbook doesn't work when the subject can eliminate your entire team before they get within 400 yards of the target. Stone's radio crackled. Again, Detective Stone, this is command. Tactical team leader wants to meet with you to discuss assault options. Victoria stood up abruptly. Tell your tactical team leader that if he attempts a conventional assault on that facility, he's going to lose people. The shooter has demonstrated professional level skills and is operating from a position that's essentially impregnable to standard police tactics. So what's the alternative? Victoria walked to her window, looking out toward Eagle Point Ridge, where the water treatment facility sat like a concrete fortress against the sky. The alternative is to fight precision with precision, to match his capabilities with capabilities he's not expecting. Stone felt her pulse quicken. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that your shooter made one mistake. He assumed that no one in Millbrook would have the skills necessary to challenge him at his own game. Victoria turned back to Stone. He was almost right. The detective stared at the woman who just revealed herself to be far more than a dismissed restaurant worker. Ms. Hayes, are you suggesting that you have the capability to ... I'm suggesting that 800 yards is well within my effective range. What I'm not sure about is whether you're prepared to trust someone who was fired from a prep cook position this morning to handle a situation that your trained tactical officers can't solve. Stone's radio erupted with another urgent transmission. All units, the suspect is fired again. We have a civilian down. Repeat, civilian down. Appears to be a leg wound. Victim is mobile but needs immediate medical attention. Victoria's jaw tightened. He's done with warning shots. Detective, you have maybe an hour before this situation turns deadly for real. Your choice is simple. Trust your tactical team to attempt an assault that will likely result in multiple officer casualties, or consider that sometimes the person who looks least qualified might actually be exactly what the situation requires. Stone looked at Victoria Hayes, former Staff Sergeant Hayes, and realized that she was facing a decision that would define not just her career, but potentially the lives of everyone in Millbrook. Trust the system, or trust the quiet woman who just revealed capabilities that shouldn't exist in a fired restaurant worker. The radio crackled again with reports of the wounded civilian, and Stone made her choice. What would you need? Victoria's response was immediate and precise, the kind of tactical assessment that came from years of life and death decision-making. I need to see the facility layout, current weather conditions, and a position that gives me a clear shot at 800 yards with minimal civilian exposure. Detective Stone was already reaching for her radio. Command, this is Stone. I need to speak with the tactical team leader immediately. We may have a specialized resource available. Within 15 minutes, Victoria found herself in the back of a police cruiser, racing toward the command post that had been established at Millbrook High School. The school's elevated position provided a clear view of Eagle Point Ridge, and its distance from the water treatment facility put it safely outside the shooter's effective range. As they pulled up to the school, Victoria could see the organized chaos of a major emergency response. State police vehicles, ambulances, fire trucks, and the imposing black tactical vehicles of the SWAT team created a maze of emergency equipment in the school parking lot. Officers moved with urgent purpose, but Victoria could see the frustration in their movements. They were facing a problem that their standard procedures couldn't solve. Commander Jake Sullivan of the State Police Tactical Unit was a 20-year veteran who'd handled dozens of high-risk situations. When Detective Stone introduced Victoria as a specialized consultant with relevant military experience, his skepticism was immediate and barely concealed. Ma'am, I appreciate any insights you might have, but this is an active tactical situation. We've got trained snipers inbound, and we're developing an assault plan that— Commander Sullivan, Victoria interrupted quietly. Where are your snipers positioned? Sullivan gestured toward the tactical map spread across a folding table. We've got overwatch positions here and here. He pointed to 2 locations. Maximum effective range from these positions is approximately 400 yards, and the target is at 800 yards. Correct. That's why we're planning a dynamic entry. Get close enough to neutralize the threat before he kills half your team. Victoria finished. Commander, what's your assessment of the shooter's capabilities based on the shots he's taken so far? Sullivan's jaw tightened. Based on observed accuracy, we believe we're dealing with someone with advanced military training. Possibly special operations background, Victoria nodded. I agree, which means he's anticipated every move you're planning to make. The approach routes you're considering, the entry points you've identified, The timing of your assault, he's been watching your deployment for the past hour, and he knows exactly what you're going to do. Commander Sullivan looked at Detective Stone with barely controlled irritation. Who exactly is this woman, and why is she second-guessing tactical decisions made by trained professionals? Stone took a deep breath. Commander, meet Staff Sergeant Victoria Hayes, formerly of the 1st Special Forces Group, 12 years of service, multiple combat deployments, and according to her record. Stone paused, having run Victoria's name through military databases during the drive to the command post. She holds the record for the longest confirmed sniper kill in her unit's history. The tactical map suddenly seemed very quiet. Sullivan stared at Victoria with new attention. What distance? 847 yards, Victoria said simply. Afghanistan 2019. Single shot. Eliminated a high-value target who was using civilian hostages as human shields. Sullivan's entire demeanor changed. Jesus, that's a hell of a shot. It was a necessary shot. Just like this one is going to be. As if summoned by her words, the radio crackled with another urgent transmission. Command, the suspect has fired again. Struck the corner of the post office. We're getting reports that he's systematically targeting buildings with the most civilian activity. Victoria moved to the tactical map, her trained eye quickly assessing the situation. He's not random targeting. Look at the pattern: police station, courthouse, post office. He's hitting symbols of authority, demonstrating that he can reach any official building in town. So what's his endgame? Sullivan asked. Unknown. But what I can tell you is that his pattern suggests he's working towards something. The infrastructure shots, the civilian casualty, he's escalating on a timeline. You've got maybe 2 hours before he stops making demonstrations and starts making statements. Sullivan studied the map, then looked at Victoria. Staff Sergeant Hayes, I'm going to ask you a direct question. Do you believe you can make a shot at this distance under current conditions? Victoria was quiet for a moment, considering factors that most people would never think to calculate. Wind speed and direction, temperature, humidity, elevation differences, the rotation of the Earth itself. Commander, I need current weather data, and I need to see the actual facility layout. A meteorologist from the National Weather Service had been called in to support the operation. She provided Victoria with precise readings, wind speed averaging 12 miles per hour from the southwest, temperature 72 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity at 43%. Visibility was excellent, with clear skies and no precipitation expected. Victoria studied the aerial photographs of the water treatment facility, noting the concrete construction, the tower's height, and the limited angles of approach. The shot is technically feasible, she said finally. But there are complications. What kind of complications? First, I need a rifle. My personal weapons are in storage, and I need something I can zero properly. Second, I need a position that gives me the right angle without exposing civilians to crossfire. Third, double quote, Victoria paused. I need to be sure that taking this shot is the right call. Sullivan frowned. What do you mean? Commander, I've been out of active service for 3 years. The last time I fired a precision shot, things went wrong in ways that ended my career. I'm not the same person who made that 847-yard shot in Afghanistan. The radio crackled again, this time with the voice of Chief Torres. All units, we've just received intelligence from the FBI. The suspect has been identified as former Army Ranger Michael Davidson, dishonorably discharged 6 months ago after a psychological evaluation. He's been making threats against government facilities for the past 3 months. Victoria felt something cold settle in her stomach. Army Ranger? You know the type? Sullivan asked. I know the training. Rangers are taught to hold defensive positions against overwhelming odds. If Davidson is having a psychological break and he's chosen this facility as his final stand, Victoria shook her head. "Commander, he's not planning to surrender. He's planning to take as many people with him as possible." As if to confirm her assessment, the next radio transmission sent chills through everyone at the command post. "Command. This is Overwatch Position 1. The suspect appears to be changing his position. He's moved to the north side of the tower, and, Jesus Christ, he's got a clear shot at the elementary school playground." Victoria's training kicked in instantly. She could visualize the angles, calculate the distances, understand exactly what Davidson was threatening. From the north side of the tower, he would have direct line of sight to Millbrook Elementary, where over 300 children were currently in lockdown. "Commander," Victoria said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd faced impossible. "Decisions before, you don't have 2 hours. You have maybe 20 minutes before he starts targeting the school. Your tactical team can't get close enough fast enough, and your snipers can't make the shot from their current positions." Sullivan stared at the tactical map, then at Victoria. "Staff Sergeant Hayes, I'm going to ask you one more time. Can you make this shot?" Victoria looked out toward Eagle Point Ridge, where a damaged former soldier was threatening the lives of innocent children. She thought of her old team, of the shot that had made her famous and destroyed her career, of the 3 years she'd spent trying to find purpose beyond the crosshairs of a rifle scope. "Get me a rifle," she said quietly, "and clear me a shot." The impossible had become necessary, and Victoria Hayes was about to discover whether 3 years of chopping vegetables had dulled the skills that had once made her one of the most feared. Snipers in the Special Forces. Time was running out, and everything, the lives of 300 children, the safety of an entire town, and the redemption of a warrior who'd lost her way depended on a single shot across 800 yards of Colorado sky. The rifle they brought Victoria was a Remington M24, the same model she'd trained on at Fort Benning over a decade ago. As she lifted it from its case, muscle memory flooded back, the weight distribution, the balance point, the familiar feel. Of precision-engineered steel and polymer designed for one purpose, placing bullets exactly where they needed to go at distances that challenged the laws of physics. "This is zeroed for 300 yards, the state police sniper who'd provided the weapon told her. "I've got 168 grain match ammunition, but at 800 yards you're going to need to compensate for bullet drop of approximately 96 inches, wind drift of roughly 18 inches based on current conditions, and about 2.3 seconds of flight time," Victoria finished, running her hands over the rifle's familiar contours. "I'll need 5 rounds to confirm 0 at this distance." Commander Sullivan checked his watch. "Staff Sergeant, we may not have time for Commander." Victoria's voice carried the quiet authority that had once made colonels listen when she spoke. "I haven't fired a precision shot in 3 years. I'm not taking an 800-yard shot that could determine whether children live or die without confirming my 0. Find me 5 minutes and a safe backstop." The transformation was remarkable. The dismissed prep cook who'd walked out of Copper Creek Grill that morning was gone, replaced by the professional warrior who'd once been one of the Army's most reliable snipers. Victoria's movements became economical and precise. Her voice took on the measured cadence of someone accustomed to life and death decisions, and her eyes held the focused intensity that Ben Cooper had glimpsed but never understood. Tactical team established a firing position behind the school's maintenance building. Victoria began her pre-shot routine. She checked the rifle's action, examined the scope mounts, tested the trigger pull. Every movement was deliberate, each inspection thorough but efficient. This wasn't nervous preparation, this was professional protocol being executed by someone who understood that attention to detail was the difference between success and catastrophe. Detective Stone watched from a respectful distance, still processing the revelation that the quiet woman she'd met in the apartment above, the laundromat, was actually a decorated combat veteran with skills that bordered on the supernatural. Victoria she said quietly. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria looked up from her rifle inspection. "Go ahead. If you're this good, if you have these capabilities, why were you working as a prep cook? Why hide what you can do?" Victoria was quiet for a moment, her hands continuing their methodical check of the weapon systems. "Detective, have you ever been really good at something that required you to hurt people?" Stone considered this. "I suppose police work sometimes." "No," Victoria interrupted gently. "I mean something where your entire value as a human being was measured by your ability to end other human beings' lives from distances they could never imagine. Where your worth was calculated in confirmed kills and successful missions." She lifted the rifle, checking the scope alignment. "When I left the Army, I wanted to find out if I could be valuable in ways that didn't involve a trigger and a target. Cooking seemed like the opposite of what I'd been creating instead of destroying. Nourishing instead of eliminating." "And how did that work out?" Victoria's smile was rueful. "Apparently, I'm better at the destroying part. Chef Russo was right about one thing: I don't have passion for cooking. I have competence, but not passion. This, though." She gestured toward the rifle. "This feels like coming home." Commander Sullivan approached with weather updates and tactical intelligence. "Staff Sergeant, we've confirmed that Davidson has a clear shot at the elementary school playground. The children are in lockdown, but if he decides to start shooting through windows... I understand the stakes, Commander." Victoria settled into the firing position they'd prepared, adjusting the bipod legs with practiced efficiency. "What's the latest on his behavior pattern?" "He's been quiet for the past 10 minutes. Our behavioral analyst thinks he might be working up to something significant." Victoria nodded, settling behind the scope and beginning her range estimation. 800 yards was a significant distance, but not impossible for someone with her training. The challenge wasn't the distance, it was the 3 years of civilian life that had dulled reflexes once sharp enough to save lives and end threats with surgical precision. The first shot was deliberately aimed at a concrete barrier. 850 yards away, safely beyond any civilian areas. Victoria controlled her breathing, felt her heart rate slow to the combat rhythm she'd trained for thousands of hours to achieve, and squeezed the trigger with the steady pressure that had become second nature. The bullet struck 18 inches low, and 4 inches left of her point of aim. "Scope adjustment," she murmured, making precise corrections to the elevation and windage knobs. The second shot was closer 8 inches low, 2 inches left. The third shot was within 2 inches of center dot. By the fifth shot, Victoria Hayes was placing bullets exactly where she intended them to go at a distance that challenged most professional marksmen. "Zero confirmed," she announced, her voice carrying a confidence that had been absent during her months at the restaurant. "Commander, I'm ready." Sullivan studied her through his binoculars. "Staff Sergeant, I have to ask, are you sure about this? We're asking you to take a shot that most snipers would consider extremely difficult under ideal conditions. You've been out of service for 3 years. You're using an unfamiliar rifle, and if you miss..." "If I miss, children die," Victoria finished. "Commander, I've spent 3 years trying to convince myself that I didn't miss this. That I was happier as a civilian, that I'd found peace in a quiet life chopping vegetables and following orders from people who didn't understand what I was capable of." She settled behind the rifle, her body falling into the shooting position with the muscle memory of countless hours of training. But watching that news coverage, seeing the tactical situation unfold, knowing that there's a threat out there that conventional law enforcement can't handle, Victoria's voice took on a quality that Commander Sullivan recognized from his own combat veterans. "This is what I was trained for. This is what I'm good at. And sometimes, being good at something means you have the responsibility to use it when others can't." The radio crackled with urgent traffic. "Command, this is Overwatch Position 2. The suspect is moving again." He's setting up what looks like a shooting rest on the north side of the tower. Repeat, he appears to be preparing to engage targets. In the direction of the school, Victoria's jaw tightened. Commander, I need you to clear all personnel from between my position and the target. I need absolute certainty that there are no civilians in the potential line of fire. Already done. The area has been evacuated, and we've got spotters confirming clear fields of fire. Victoria nodded, settling into the zone of focused calm that had once made her legendary among her peers. Then let's end this. As she prepared for the shot that would either save hundreds of lives or haunt her forever, Victoria Hayes felt the weight of 3 years of civilian life falling away. The quiet prep cook who'd been dismissed and overlooked was gone, replaced by the warrior she'd always been underneath: precise, professional, and absolutely committed to protecting the innocent, no matter the personal cost. The shot of her lifetime was moments away, and everything she'd learned in kitchens and combat zones was about to be tested against an impossible distance and an unacceptable alternative. Staff Sergeant Victoria Hayes was back, and Millbrook was about to discover what precision really meant. The world narrowed to the circle of glass at the end of Victoria's scope. 800 yards away, former Army Ranger Michael Davidson was settling into a shooting position that would give him clear lines of fire into Millbrook Elementary School. Through her magnified view, Victoria could see him adjusting his rifle rest, checking his scope alignment, preparing to do something that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. "Command, this is Overwatch," the spotter's voice crackled over the radio. "Target is in position. He's got his weapon trained on the school building. I can see children at the windows." Victoria's breathing steadied into the rhythm she'd learned at sniper school: deep inhale, slow exhale, natural respiratory pause where the body was perfectly still. In that moment of biological calm, she began her final calculations. Range: 800 yards confirmed by laser rangefinder. Wind: 12 miles per hour, quartering from the southwest, requiring a 16-inch compensation to the left. Temperature: 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity: 43%. Bullet drop: 94 inches at this distance, requiring significant elevation adjustment. But there were other factors that wouldn't appear in any manual. The rotation of the Earth itself at this distance. The Coriolis effect would push her bullet approximately 2 inches to the right. The slight upward angle of her shot, firing from the school's elevated position toward the water treatment facilities. Tower: the psychological pressure of knowing that 300 children's lives depended on a single bullet traveling nearly half a mile. "Staff Sergeant," Commander Sullivan's voice was quiet, professional. "What's your assessment?" Victoria studied the target through her scope. Davidson was wearing tactical gear, positioned behind concrete barriers that provided excellent protection. The shot window was minimal, maybe 8 inches of exposed torso, partially obscured by the rifle he was aiming toward the school. "Difficult, but feasible," she replied, her voice carrying the clinical detachment that came from years of making life-and-death decisions. "Target is in hardened position with limited exposure. Shot window is approximately 8 inches, partially obscured. Wind conditions are manageable but will require precise compensation. Time frame?" Victoria watched Davidson through her scope. He was taking his time, setting up his shot with the methodical care of someone who wanted to ensure maximum damage. "He's not rushing. I estimate 2 to 3 minutes before he's ready to fire. Take the shot when ready, Staff Sergeant." Victoria settled deeper into her shooting position, feeling the familiar embrace of the rifle stock against her cheek, the precise pressure of the trigger against her finger. This was the position she'd held on rooftops in Kandahar, in hide sites overlooking Taliban supply routes, in the mountains where her team had hunted high-value targets through some of the most dangerous terrain on Earth. But this shot was different. In Afghanistan, she'd been hunting enemies who'd chosen their path, soldiers and terrorists who'd accepted the risks of their profession. Michael Davidson was a broken veteran, someone who'd served his country and been damaged by that service. He was a threat that had to be stopped, but he was also a casualty of the same wars that had shaped Victoria's own skills. "I see him," she murmured into her radio. "Target is adjusting his position. He's preparing to fire." Through her scope, Victoria could see Davidson's finger moving toward his trigger. At Millbrook Elementary, 300 children were in lockdown, teachers doing their best to keep them calm while armed police officers stood guard in hallways, knowing that their body armor and tactical training would be useless against a precision rifle fired from 800 yards away. Victoria thought of her own sister's children, of the niece and nephew she'd missed watching grow up, because she'd been deployed in places where people like Davidson were created. She thought of her old team Rodriguez, Jackson, Martinez, who died in an ambush while she'd been facing a disciplinary board for saving civilian lives. The crosshairs settled on the center of Davidson's exposed torso. At this distance, with current wind conditions, Victoria knew she had to aim 16 inches to the left and 94 inches high to compensate for bullet drop. The shot would take 2.3 seconds to reach its target, enough time for Davidson to complete his own shot if her timing was off by even a fraction of a second. "Target is acquiring his shot," the spotter reported urgently. "He's got the school in his crosshairs." Victoria's heart rate dropped to 52 beats per minute, the combat rhythm she'd trained for thousands of hours to achieve. Her breathing became controlled, mechanical. The slight tremor in her hands, residual nervousness from 3 years away from precision shooting, disappeared entirely. This was the moment she'd been avoiding for 3 years. The moment when Victoria Hayes stopped being a prep cook trying to find peace and became Staff Sergeant Hayes, one of the most lethal snipers the Army had ever produced. "Target is preparing to fire," came the urgent radio call. Victoria squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with familiar authority, the .308 caliber bullet leaving the muzzle at 2,650 feet per second. For 2.3 seconds, everything hung in the balance. 300 young lives, the safety of an entire town, and the redemption of a warrior who'd spent 3 years wondering if she'd lost the skills that had once defined her. 800 yards away, traveling through air thick with humidity and crosswinds that would challenge the best marksman in the world. Victoria's bullet followed a trajectory calculated with the precision of physics and guided by instincts honed through years of combat. The bullet struck Michael Davidson in the center of his chest with enough force to knock him backward from his shooting position. His rifle discharged harmlessly into the sky as he fell, the shot that would have shattered classroom windows and ended young lives instead echoing uselessly across the empty valley. "Target down," the spotter called out. "Clean hit, center mass. Target is neutralized." Victoria kept her scope trained on Davidson's position for another 30 seconds, watching for any sign of movement. When she was satisfied that the threat was ended, she slowly lifted her head from the rifle scope and looked around at the tactical team that had gathered to witness what many of them would later describe as the most incredible shot they'd ever seen. Commander Sullivan was staring at her with something approaching awe. "Staff Sergeant Hayes, that was... Jesus Christ, that was an impossible shot." Victoria safetied her rifle and began the post-engagement procedures she'd learned years ago. "It was a necessary shot, Commander. The distance was well within my capabilities." But even as she said the words, Victoria knew that what she'd just accomplished went beyond simple marksmanship. She'd fired a precision shot under extreme pressure, using an unfamiliar rifle, after 3 years away from combat, and placed a bullet exactly where it needed to go to save hundreds of innocent lives. The quiet prep cook who'd been dismissed from Copper Creek Grill that morning had just reminded the world what true expertise looked like when it was finally given the chance to shine. As sirens wailed across Millbrook and tactical teams moved to secure the water treatment facility. Victoria Hayes sat quietly behind her rifle, knowing that she'd found her way back to who she'd always been: a protector, a professional, and someone whose skills mattered in ways that went far beyond chopping vegetables or following orders from people who'd never understood what she was capable of. The shot had been perfect, dead center at 800 yards. Just like the old days when precision meant everything and there was no such thing as second place. The news crews arrived within an hour, their satellite trucks and camera equipment, transforming the Millbrook High School parking lot into an impromptu media center. By evening, Victoria's shot would be analyzed by ballistics experts on national television, described as one of the most remarkable displays of marksmanship in law enforcement history, by commentators who didn't even know her name yet. But for now, in the immediate aftermath of the crisis, Victoria sat quietly in the school's conference room, methodically cleaning the rifle that had just saved 300 lives. Her movements were automatic, muscle memory from thousands of hours of weapons maintenance, while around her the controlled chaos of post-incident procedures unfolded. Commander Sullivan entered with a stack of paperwork and an expression that mixed professional respect with something approaching reverence. "Staff Sergeant Hayes," he began, then paused. "Actually, what should I call you now? You're not active military anymore." Victoria looked up from her cleaning routine. "Victoria is fine, Commander, or Ms. Hayes if you prefer formal." "Victoria, then." Sullivan sat across from her, his demeanor entirely different from their first meeting. "I've been in law enforcement for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just did. That shot! Hell, that shot is going to be talked about in tactical training schools for decades." Victoria reassembled the rifle's bolt with practiced efficiency. It was within acceptable parameters for the situation. The distance was challenging, but not extreme for someone with proper training. Sullivan almost laughed. "Victoria, you just made a perfect shot at 800 yards, under pressure, with a rifle you'd never used before, after being out of practice for 3 years. That's not acceptable parameters. That's the kind of shooting that becomes legend." Through the conference room windows, Victoria could see parents arriving at Millbrook Elementary to collect their children. Tears of relief, tight hugs, the kind of gratitude that came from narrowly avoided tragedy. She watched a mother embrace her young daughter, saw a father lift his son into his arms, witnessed the joy of families reunited after hours of unthinkable fear. "Commander," Victoria said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "In your 20 years of law enforcement, how many times have you had to take a life?" Sullivan was quiet for a moment. "Twice, both justified, both necessary, but ... He shook his head. "They stay with you," Victoria nodded. "That was my 37th confirmed kill. Most of them were in combat zones, enemy combatants who were actively threatening American lives. But today ... She paused, her hand stilling on the rifle. "Today I killed a broken veteran who served his country and was damaged by that service. Someone who might have been saved if he'd gotten the help he needed. Victoria, you saved 300 children." Michael Davidson made his choice when he positioned himself to fire on a school. "I know. And I'd make the same decision again. But it doesn't change what we've lost, not just Davidson, but all the people like him who come home broken and don't get the support they need to heal." Detective Stone knocked on the conference room door, entering with a tablet showing news coverage of the incident. "Victoria, you need to see this. The story's already gone national." The screen showed aerial footage of the water treatment facility, with graphics illustrating the 800-yard distance between Victoria's position and Davidson's location. The reporter was interviewing a military expert who was explaining the difficulty of such a shot in terms that made Victoria's accomplishment sound almost supernatural. "They're calling you the guardian angel of Millbrook," Stone said. "The story is that a former Special Forces sniper was working as a prep cook in a local restaurant, hiding her identity until a crisis forced her to reveal her capabilities. Victoria winced. I wasn't hiding my identity. I was trying to move on from it. Well, that's not going to be possible anymore. The phone hasn't stopped ringing. Interview requests, job offers, publishers wanting to discuss book deals. You're about to become very famous, Victoria. The thought of fame made Victoria distinctly uncomfortable. She'd spent 3 years cultivating anonymity, finding peace in the routine of civilian work. The idea of being thrust back into the spotlight, of having her military service and personal struggles dissected by strangers, felt almost as daunting as the shot she'd just made. There's something else, Stone continued. Ben Cooper from Copper Creek Grill has been calling. He wants to talk to you. Victoria felt a pang of something she couldn't quite identify. Guilt? Regret? The restaurant felt like another lifetime now, but it had been her world just this morning. What does he want? He didn't say, but he sounded, I don't know, impressed? Apologetic? Maybe you should call him back. 20 minutes later, Victoria was walking through the parking lot of Copper Creek Grill, her boots crunching on gravel. That seemed different somehow, as if the events of the day had changed even the mundane details of her former workplace. Through the kitchen windows, she could see the dinner prep in full swing. Ben at his station, Emma carrying plates, even Chef Russo barking orders with his usual theatrical intensity. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and the restaurant fell silent. Every employee, every customer, every person in the building turned to stare at the woman who'd left as a dismissed prep cook and returned as a national hero. Ben Cooper was the first to speak. Victoria. His voice carried a weight of understanding. That hadn't been there that morning. We saw the news. Jesus, we had no idea. Victoria nodded uncomfortably. You weren't supposed to. I wanted to leave that life behind. But you couldn't, Emma said, stepping forward from behind the bar. When people needed you, when children were in danger, you couldn't stay hidden. Chef Russo appeared from the kitchen, his usual bluster replaced by something Victoria had never seen from him before: genuine humility. Hayes, he began, then stopped and started over. Victoria, I owe you an apology. A big one. You don't owe me anything, Chef. Yes, I do. I spent months treating you like you were worthless, dismissing your skills, making your life miserable. And all that time, you were. He gestured helplessly. You were one of the most capable people I've ever met, and I was too stupid and too insecure to see it. Victoria studied his face, seeing genuine remorse instead of the defensive anger she'd grown accustomed to. Chef Russo, I never expected you to know about my background. That was the point. But I should have recognized quality when I saw it. Your knife work, your attention to detail, the way you handled pressure, those weren't the skills of someone who didn't know what they were doing. Those were the skills of someone who'd been trained to a level I couldn't even comprehend. Manager Kevin Brooks emerged from his office, his clipboard conspicuously absent, his corporate composure replaced by the awkward uncertainty of a man who'd made a terrible mistake. Victoria, if there's anything we can do, if you'd consider coming back. Victoria almost smiled. Mr. Brooks, with respect, I don't think I'll be chopping vegetables anymore. No, I suppose not. Brooks looked around the restaurant, taking in the obvious reverence with which his staff was treating Victoria. You know, Marcus Steinberg called this afternoon. The efficiency consultant? He wanted to withdraw his recommendations about staff cuts, said that sometimes the most valuable employees are the ones you don't recognize until it's too late. Victoria felt a sense of closure that she hadn't expected. The dismissal that morning, the disrespect and casual cruelty she'd endured for months, none of it mattered now. She'd found her way back to who she was meant to be, and these people had played their part in that journey, even if they'd never understood it at the time. Thank you for the apology, she said to Russo. And thank you for the opportunity, she added to Brooks. Working here taught me something important. What's that? Ben asked. Victoria looked around the restaurant. The faces of people who'd worked beside her without ever really seeing her. It taught me that hiding who you are doesn't bring peace. It just wastes the gifts you're supposed to use to help others. As she walked toward the door, Emma called out, "Victoria? What happens now?" Victoria paused, one hand on the door handle. Now I figure out how to be Staff Sergeant Hayes and Victoria Hayes at the same time. How to use what I'm good at without losing who I want to be. She stepped out into the evening air, where Detective Stone was waiting by her patrol car. In the distance, the lights of Millbrook Elementary glowed warmly, filled with children who would go home safely to their families because a quiet prep cook had remembered that sometimes the most important thing you can do is be exactly who you were meant to be when people need you most. The recognition felt strange, but the redemption felt right. Victoria Hayes had found her way back to herself, and the world was a safer place because of it. 6 weeks after the shot that saved Millbrook, Victoria Hayes stood in the conference room of the Colorado State Police Regional Training Center, watching a class of tactical officers struggle with long-range shooting fundamentals. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd gone from being dismissed as an incompetent prep cook to being recruited as a specialist instructor for elite law enforcement units. "The problem," she told the class, her voice carrying the authority that came from proven expertise, "is that you're thinking of the rifle as a tool for hitting targets. At extended ranges, the rifle becomes a tool for solving complex mathematical problems. Wind, temperature, humidity, elevation, even the rotation of the earth. Every shot beyond 400 yards is an equation with multiple variables." Officer Martinez, a 10-year veteran with the Denver Police SWAT team, raised his hand. "Ma'am, how do you calculate all those factors under pressure? In a real-world situation, you don't have time to do math." Victoria smiled, remembering asking similar questions during her own training at Fort Benning. "Officer Martinez, you don't calculate them in the moment. You train until reading environmental conditions becomes as automatic as breathing. You practice until your body makes the adjustments without conscious thought. The math becomes instinct." She moved to the demonstration rifle, a precision instrument that felt as familiar in her hands as a kitchen knife once had. "Let me show you what I mean." The target was positioned at 600 yards, well within the effective range of most police snipers, but challenging enough to demonstrate advanced techniques. Victoria settled into position, her movements economical and precise, every adjustment deliberate yet fluid. "Current conditions," she announced for the class. "Wind speed 8 miles per hour from the northwest, temperature 68 degrees, humidity 37%. Based on these factors, I'm compensating 12 inches left for wind drift and adjusting elevation for a bullet drop of approximately 54 inches. She took the shot. 600 yards away, the bullet struck the target's center ring with a precision that made several officers shake their heads in amazement. "Now," Victoria said, standing up from the rifle, "who can tell me what I did wrong?" The class looked confused. Martinez spoke up hesitantly. "Ma'am, that looked like a perfect shot to us." "The shot was accurate, but my process was flawed for a tactical situation. I announced my calculations, took too much time to settle into position, and made my adjustments too obviously. In a real crisis, the subject might have completed his mission while I was demonstrating proper form." Victoria returned to the rifle, this time moving with the fluid speed that came from years of combat experience. Her assessment of conditions was visual and instantaneous, her position acquired in seconds rather than minutes. Her shot taken with the kind of controlled speed that separated professionals from enthusiasts. The second bullet struck within inches of the first. "Speed and accuracy aren't mutually exclusive," she told the class. "But they require training that goes beyond quarterly qualifications. They require commitment to a level of proficiency that most people aren't willing to achieve." After the class, Victoria walked across the parking lot to her new office, a small space that still felt surreal after months of working in commercial kitchens. The door bore a simple placard, Victoria Hayes, Tactical Consultant. No rank, no military titles, just her name and a job description that barely captured the scope of what she'd become. Detective Stone was waiting in the hallway, her familiar presence a welcome sight after a day of training officers who looked at Victoria with a mixture of respect and awe that made her uncomfortable. "How are you adjusting?" Stone asked as they walked toward Victoria's office. "It's strange," Victoria admitted. 6 weeks ago, I was invisible. Now I can't go to the grocery store without someone recognizing me from the news coverage. The attention feels ... overwhelming? Foreign. In the military, the best snipers were the ones nobody talked about. Success was measured by missions completed, not headlines generated. This civilian version of fame is something I'm still learning to navigate. Stone settled into the chair across from Victoria's desk, which was notably sparse: a computer, a few training manuals, and a single framed photograph of her old team from Afghanistan. "Any regrets about leaving the restaurant world behind?" Victoria considered the question seriously. "Some days I miss the simplicity of it. There was something peaceful about working with food, creating something nourishing instead of ... She gestured toward the window, where officers were practicing tactical movements on the training range. But Ben Cooper called yesterday. Copper Creek Grill is struggling without consistent prep work. Apparently, Chef Russo realized that having someone who could perfectly brunoise vegetables in half the normal time was more valuable than he'd appreciated. They've gone through 3 prep cooks since I left." Stone laughed. "Are you thinking of going back?" "No, but it made me realize something important. Excellence in any field requires the same fundamentals: attention to detail, consistent practice, respect for your tools and materials, understanding that small mistakes can have big consequences. The skills translate more than people realize." Victoria's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but the area code was familiar: Virginia, near Quantico. "Victoria Hayes," she answered. "Ms. Hayes, this is Colonel Patricia Williams, FBI Hostage Rescue Team. I know you're working with state police now, but we have a situation developing that might require your specific expertise." Victoria felt the familiar tightening in her chest that came with the prospect of high-stakes operations. "What kind of situation, Colonel?" "Without going into details over an unsecured line, I can tell you that we have a barricaded subject in a fortified position, civilian hostages, and tactical challenges that exceed our standard response capabilities. Based on your recent performance in Colorado, you've been recommended as a specialist consultant." Victoria looked at Detective Stone, who was watching with obvious curiosity. This was the world she'd been drawn back into, not just training officers in peaceful classrooms, but potentially returning to the kind of life-and-death situations that had defined her military career. "When do you need an answer, Colonel?" "We're wheels up in 4 hours. This is voluntary, Ms. Hayes, but the tactical commander believes your capabilities might be the difference between a successful resolution and a tragedy." Victoria closed her eyes for a moment, weighing the decision. She'd found a comfortable middle ground between her military past and civilian aspirations, training others to handle the situations she'd once faced personally. Taking this assignment would mean stepping back into the arena where her shots could determine whether innocence lived or died. "Colonel Williams," she said finally, "send me the briefing materials. I'll be ready in 2 hours." After ending the call, Victoria looked at Stone, who was shaking her head with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You can't help yourself, can you?" Stone asked. "When people need help, when innocent lives are at stake, you can't say no." Victoria stood up and walked to her equipment locker, where her personal rifle case waited alongside tactical gear she hoped she'd never need to use again. Rachel, do you know what the hardest part of transitioning to civilian life was? What? Learning that most problems can't be solved with precision and training. Most of life is messy, complicated, full of variables you can't control or calculate, but sometimes. She lifted her rifle case, feeling its familiar weight. Sometimes the problem is exactly the kind that can be solved with one perfectly placed shot. And when that happens, when innocent people are depending on capabilities that only a few people in the world possess, Victoria headed toward the door, her movements already shifting into the focused efficiency that preceded difficult missions. Sometimes you have to be who you were trained to be, not who you thought you wanted to become. As she walked toward her car, Victoria Hayes, former prep cook, current tactical instructor, and always a guardian prepared to discover whether the redemption she'd found in Millbrook was strong enough to carry her through whatever challenge awaited in Virginia. The quiet woman who'd once hidden behind vegetables and anonymity was gone forever. In her place stood someone who'd learned that true peace didn't come from avoiding your gifts, but from using them to protect others when they needed protection most. 1 year after the shot that saved Millbrook, Victoria Hayes stood in the same apartment above the laundromat, packing equipment for what would be her 15th consultation with federal law enforcement agencies. The sparse room that had once housed a hiding prep cook now served as the headquarters for someone who'd become known in tactical circles as simply the Millbrook Sniper, a designation that carried weight in briefing rooms from Quantico to Colorado Springs. On her desk lay a letter that had arrived that morning, handwritten on elementary school stationery with the careful penmanship of a 10-year-old. Victoria had received dozens of thank you letters from Millbrook families, but this one was different. It was from Sarah Chun, one of the children who'd been in lockdown during the crisis, and her words carried the simple clarity that only children possessed. Dear Ms. Victoria, the letter read, my mom told me you were the lady who saved us from the scary man. She said you used to cook food, but you were really good at protecting people. I want to be like you when I grow up. Not the shooting part, because that's scary, but the protecting part. My teacher says protecting people is the most important job in the world. Thank you for protecting us. P.S. My mom wants to know if you still cook because she says anyone who can be that good at one thing must be good at other things too. Victoria smiled, remembering her conversation with young Sarah's mother just 2 weeks ago. Margaret Chun had approached her after a community event, tears in her eyes, struggling to find words adequate to express her gratitude. The conversation had reminded Victoria that her shot hadn't just neutralized a threat, it had preserved futures, protected dreams, allowed hundreds of families to continue their stories without the devastating interruption of tragedy. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ben Cooper. Saw you on the news again. FBI thing in Baltimore looked intense. Hope you're staying safe. P.S. Still can't find a prep cook who cuts vegetables like you did. The offer to come back still stands though. I know you've got more important things to do now. The message made Victoria laugh softly. In the past year, she'd consulted on hostage situations in 3 states, trained sniper teams for federal agencies, and developed tactical protocols that were being implemented across the country. But somehow, Ben still thought of her as the woman who'd chopped onions with surgical precision at Copper Creek Grill. Emma Walsh had visited last month, bringing news from the restaurant that felt like updates from another lifetime. Chef Russo had apparently undergone a complete personality transformation, treating his staff with a respect that bordered on reverence. Manager Brooks had implemented new policies that emphasized recognizing and nurturing employee potential, instead of viewing workers as interchangeable parts. Even Marcus Steinberg, the efficiency consultant, had modified his approach after the Millbrook incident, focusing on identifying hidden talent rather than simply cutting costs. You changed that place, Emma had told her over coffee. Not just by leaving, but by showing everyone what happens when you dismiss someone's capabilities, without understanding what they're really capable of. Victoria's laptop chimed with an incoming video call. The screen showed Colonel Patricia Williams from the FBI hostage rescue team, calling from her office at Quantico. Over the past year, Williams had become both a professional colleague and something approaching a friend, one of the few people who understood the unique challenges of being a woman in a field dominated by men who sometimes struggled to accept that the most lethal sniper they'd ever worked with had once chopped vegetables for a living. "Victoria," Williams said as the connection stabilized, "I wanted to give you an update on the Baltimore situation." The hostage-taker's family released a statement thanking law enforcement for resolving the crisis without loss of life. They specifically mentioned the precision and restraint shown by our tactical team. Victoria nodded. The Baltimore case had been delicate. A former Marine with PTSD who'd barricaded himself in his apartment with his ex-wife and 2 children. Victoria's role had been to provide overwatch while negotiators worked to de-escalate the situation. When the subject had finally emerged with a weapon, Victoria's precise shot had disabled him without causing fatal injury, a level of accuracy that had allowed a troubled veteran to survive and eventually receive the mental health treatment he desperately needed. "How's his recovery progressing?" Victoria asked. "Physical therapy is going well. The psychological treatment is more complex, but he's engaged with the process. His children were able to visit him yesterday." Williams paused. "Victoria, cases like this are why your approach has become so valuable. You don't just neutralize threats, you find ways to preserve life even in the most impossible circumstances." After ending the call, Victoria walked to her window and looked out over Millbrook. The town had returned to its peaceful routine, but small changes remained as reminders of that day. The elementary school had installed new security measures. The water treatment facility had been upgraded with better perimeter defenses. Most significantly, the local police department had established a crisis response protocol that emphasized bringing in specialized resources when situations exceeded local capabilities, a direct result of learning that expertise could be found in unexpected places. Detective Stone had been promoted to lieutenant, partly based on her decision to trust Victoria's capabilities when conventional wisdom suggested otherwise. She'd become an advocate for innovative thinking in law enforcement, frequently speaking at conferences about the importance of recognizing expertise, regardless of its source. Victoria's phone rang again, this time showing a number she didn't recognize. With a Colorado area code, "Victoria Hayes," she answered. "Ms. Hayes? This is Captain Jennifer Morris with the Denver Police Department. We have a situation developing that our tactical team believes might benefit from your consultation. Are you available?" Victoria looked around her apartment, at the equipment cases that contained tools designed for precision at impossible distances, at the awards and commendations that had replaced her simple kitchen knife collection, at the photographs that showed her with tactical teams and federal agents instead of restaurant staff. "Captain Morris," she said, "I can be there in 4 hours. Send me the briefing materials." As she began gathering her equipment, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she'd been a dismissed prep cook, hiding her capabilities behind routine tasks and quiet competence. Today, she was someone whose phone rang when conventional solutions weren't enough, when precision mattered more than protocol, when innocent lives hung in the balance and ordinary approaches wouldn't suffice. The transformation hadn't been easy. Fame was uncomfortable for someone who'd spent 3 years cultivating anonymity. The constant travel and high-stress consultations took their toll. There were still nights when she woke up at 3:17 a.m., remembering shots that had saved lives and wondering about the paths not taken. But there were also letters from children like Sarah Chun, messages from families whose stories had continued because someone with the right skills had been in the right place at the right moment. There were tactical officers who'd learned to think beyond conventional limitations, Federal agents who discovered that the most qualified person for an impossible job might not fit their expectations of what expertise looked like. Victoria locked her apartment and walked toward her car, her equipment cases secure in the trunk, her mind already shifting into the focused state that preceded difficult missions. She'd found her purpose in the space between her two identities, the quiet woman who'd sought peace in civilian life, and the warrior who'd been trained to protect innocence at impossible distances. As she drove toward Denver, Victoria Hayes smiled. At the memory of Chef Russo's dismissive voice, Hayes can barely handle basic knife work. If only he could see her now, heading toward another situation where precision would matter more than pride, where capabilities would be measured not by hierarchy or assumptions, but by results. When everything was on the line, the quiet chef had become exactly what she was meant to be, a guardian whose skills served others, a protector whose precision could change the outcome when conventional wisdom failed, and a reminder that sometimes the most important person in the room is the one everyone overlooks until the moment when their unique gifts become the only thing standing between safety and catastrophe. 800 yards had been just the beginning. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.